Robert, thank you so much for leading us in worship today, and thank all the rest of you for being here to worship with us today. All right, I'm gonna sound really old and dated when I start this sermon today, but we're just gonna commit to the bit and we're gonna go for it. Do you remember when we used to have to wait for things? I mean, we still kind of have to wait for some stuff, but not like we used to. I mean, for instance, there was no binging any TV show, right? I mean, you had to wait a whole week until the next episode came out. And they would leave you with these cliffhangers, and then you just had to sit there. And you had to wait until a full week went by to figure out what was going to happen next. Or then if we move to the movie screen, right? I remember as a kid, there was a movie out in the theater that I really wanted to see. And maybe we were on a strict budget at that time, or maybe we were just busy and didn't get around to it. But then the other thing you could do was rent it and bring it home to watch it. But if you missed it in the theater, I mean, you had to wait like 2 months till it came out on a VHS tape. Kids, we'll talk about that later. But it felt like it took forever for it to get from a theater to a movie store to where you could get it. And then good luck avoiding spoilers for that whole time, right? Half my friends had already seen it by then. We're trying to figure out how to get it, and you just had to wait until it came out. And then, in the early days of internet shopping, this whole, 2-day guaranteed shipping thing is fantastic. But you used to just order stuff, and it would say, 7 to 21 business days. I'm sorry, what? What's a business day? And you'd go home, and you look at the porch and say, is it here today? And if it's not, it could be tomorrow. It could be next Thursday. It could be 2 weeks from now. You just waited. You knew it was going to come. You didn't know exactly when. And so in the meantime, you just kind of had to wait. We're in Daniel chapter 7. We've been studying the book of Daniel chapter by chapter so far, and something big is going to change here in chapter 7. So before we jump into Daniel chapter 7, let's recap a little bit what happened throughout the first 6 chapters. The first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel are historical narrative in style. So again, what that means is we're going to hear stories about some things that happened in these people's lives throughout the first 6 chapters. In those 6 chapters, we're introduced to Daniel, the namesake for the book, and also his 3 friends, our other 3 kind of heroes of the book, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or as they will become known, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And throughout these first 6 chapters, again, we have kind of similar themes appearing again and again. Daniel or his friends have a run-in with a king who is pretty egocentric and prideful and motivated by his own image. A lot of times this king will want to do something crazy like build a statue and have everybody worship it, or bow down to him and worship him, or have a crazy dream and need help. And this is where Daniel and his friends come in to play. They show up in these moments, they offer counsel, or they have to react in a wise way to whatever happens here. And time again, they are proven worthy. And then Daniel in particular seems to have this talent for, of course, interpreting these dreams, for being a messenger from God. And his reputation precedes him. It doesn't matter who is king. They seem to recognize very quickly that Daniel is someone they can trust, and Daniel is someone they can turn to. And so when they come across something crazy, Daniel is someone that they call to come and inquire of his God and see if they can figure out what's going on there. So that's been the first 6 chapters. In chapter 7, the structure is going to change a little bit. We've been in this historical narrative situation, and now the rest of the book of Daniel is basically just going to be dreams and interpretations. There's going to be all sorts of crazy images, and a lot of Christianity has gone a lot of ways with stuff that happens in the end of the book of Daniel, and in particular the chapter that we're going to study today. And so as we get into chapter 7, we're going to have to set this up a little bit and kind of understand what's going to happen. So we're entering kind of the second half of the book of Daniel, and in this half we're going to enter into just continuous descriptions of dreams and their interpretations. We've also changed our time period a little bit. The first 6 chapters were chronological throughout there, and the last few will be as well, but we're going to go back and start a little earlier than where we left off. You'll notice, if you have your Bible open to Daniel chapter 7, that the first verse says that chapter 7 occurs in the first year of Belshazzar. Now, if you've been studying along with us, you might remember that Belshazzar appears in chapter 5, He's the one who is king at the time of the ghost hand that appears and writes on the wall. So we have Belshazzar at chapter 5. And then we have the end of chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's dream with the big tree. So what happens here in 7 occurs somewhere between the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5, if we're doing our chronology, right? So here we have the time frame. We have our change of style here in chapter 7. And then let's talk about the importance for a second. I read a lot of commentators, a lot of people who have been studying the book of Daniel, and they all agreed on one thing, and that is that this chapter is incredibly important. The only thing they disagreed on is just the magnitude of that importance. So one of them says, this is the most important chapter in the book of Daniel. The next one says, this is one of the most important chapters in the Old Testament. And another one will say, this is even one of the most important chapters in our entire Bible. A lot of things are going to happen in chapter 7 that we will see again and again throughout the rest of our Bible, and it's helpful if we understand what's happening. This chapter is going to shape Jewish literature from this point forward. Well, we're sitting here in the Church of Christ in 2023. What do we care? Well, most of our Bible is Jewish literature. So this chapter is going to shape a lot of what we hear moving forward. For instance, we will have the phrase appear here in chapter 7, Ancient of Days, a song that Robert led us in a while ago. This descriptor of God as the Ancient of Days appears here in Daniel chapter 7, and it's something that we love to talk about, the nature of God, and it is coined here. Also, in the New Testament, especially in the book of Matthew, Jesus will refer to himself as the Son of Man. That phrase originates here in Daniel chapter 7. And so when Jesus uses the phrase Son of Man to describe himself, he is very intentionally calling us back to Daniel chapter 7. And then also we're going to have this great prophecy about the second coming of Jesus in this chapter. And then finally, before we dig into chapter 7, you're like, okay, dude, let's get it. Let's get after it. One last thing that's pretty important here. We're going to change language in chapter 7 to this idea of apocalyptic literature. And that's a big $10 phrase. Most famously, Revelation is of the genre of apocalyptic literature. So apocalyptic literature appears in our Bible several times throughout the rest, starting here. But Daniel chapter 7 is one of the first big instances of apocalyptic literature. Now, what does that mean, you might be asking me? Apocalyptic literature is a way of writing which, in essence, looks at the things that are happening on earth, but from kind of a heavenly standpoint. Like, what does all this mean in light of what's happening in heaven? What are the eternal ties to what's happening here? What does God have to do with all of this? It's almost as if we see things happening here and we can go pull back the curtain and see behind the scenes a little bit. And so apocalyptic literature is going to be looking kind of in light of what's happening here, what does this mean eternally? And it's also going to use images and pictures to talk about them. Kind of like a code. Very symbolic in nature. You will hear in apocalyptic literature a lot of references to beasts or dragons, angels, fire, colors, all of those being incredibly symbolic. And so it appears to us kind of like a code. But not a code that necessarily needs to be cracked. Not as if we have a cipher and we have to go figure out what it means. Daniel's audience, John's audience in Revelation, Jesus' audience when he speaks in apocalyptic language, they use images that everyone was familiar with, that they would have known what that means. And if they didn't, someone around them would have immediately known. So I thought it might be helpful to give us an example from our modern day period. So if I were to tell you that every 4 years, a group of elephants and a group of donkeys gather together, and they battle for supremacy. And at the end of that battle, there will be one donkey and there will be one elephant. And in November, that one donkey and that one elephant will square off on stage for who gets to lead millions. You all know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, you're giggling and nodding along. But 5,000 years from now, somebody would look at that story and go, what is happening in this country, right? Why are there so many donkeys and elephants, and why are they fighting each other, and who knows? So this is the idea here. These are things they would have known, but coded in a language so as to tell a story, to paint a picture of what's happening. All right, enough intro. Let's get into it. Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of this dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and go eat and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings, like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. His hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but they were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." Whew, okay, that was a lot. Everybody gonna have nightmares now? All right, we got all these crazy animals and this mashup of all these characteristics all put together. We have beasts, we have fire, we have ribs, we have horns, all this craziness. And you can see how, if you're not thinking about apocalyptic literature, if you're not thinking about symbolism, you just open it up and you get to Daniel chapter 7 and you go, what in the world is going on here? Well, Daniel's going to ask for help. And when Daniel asks for help, we're going to get a key. And if we get that key, we can go back and start to figure out exactly what this is talking about. Verse 15, "I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there." This means one of the angels in the vision. "I approached one of those standing there, and I asked him the meaning of all of this. So he told me, and he gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever." Okay, so the interpreter looks at Daniel and says, so the 4 beasts are going to be kings. They are kings of the earth that will rise up. Okay, so now if we think the beasts are going to be kings, now we can go back and kind of piece them together. And there's a big clue with the first king that will unlock kind of everything that comes after there. So let's go back to Daniel 7, verse 2, and we'll start unpacking what happens in this dream. Verses 2 and 3. "Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." So we have 4 great winds. So 4 represents the 4 corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west. So we're implying something global. This is something huge, something big. And these winds are forces, in particular forces that we cannot see. These are big global forces, is the implication of the 4 heavenly winds. We don't see them, but we see what they cause. We see what they do. So the 4 big winds are coming, and they are churning up the great sea. So if you're thinking great sea, we have to go back to Genesis chapter 1. If you remember the very introduction to our Bible, we learned that in the beginning, the world was chaotic and void. There was nothing. And we're told that the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters. So this is the idea of the great sea, that before God came in Genesis chapter 1 and began to organize and create and bring order out of chaos, the world was a sea and it was chaos. The sea for them represents this kind of chaotic nature of earthly rule. So what Daniel is saying here is there before him in this vision, he saw these global forces that were creating and churning this chaotic situation on earth. This chaotic sea of people and earthly rule, and things are getting kind of crazy. And out of this earthly chaos will rise 4 different kings or empires, we might say. So let's get down to the first beast here. So the first beast, we're told, is like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. If you've been paying attention to our study in the book of Daniel, you might get to this beast and go, something sounds familiar about this beast. Something about what happens to this beast sounds really familiar, and that's because the first beast is King Nebuchadnezzar. And we know that for a couple of reasons. So first of all, you can kind of see it through my words right there, but the background for this entire story has been this image of a lion. This lion, this picture of this lion is taken from the Ishtar Gate, which was built by King Nebuchadnezzar himself. King Nebuchadnezzar used the image of the lion and of the eagle to represent his kingdom, and he often meshed them together. In fact, archaeologists have gone through and they've found statues of winged lions all throughout the ruins of Babylon. And so as Daniel starts to say, I saw this lion that had wings like an eagle, they all go, oh, that's Nebuchadnezzar for sure. Right? This is emblematic of who he is. Not only that, but the prophets Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Habakkuk in our Bible all have passages that refer to Nebuchadnezzar as either a lion or an eagle. So this is something that the world must have known. And then for our perspective, the thing that we might notice is that this king has his wings stripped away. You might say he has his power taken from him, just like Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4. And then at the end of chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar's power is restored. So he is stood up on 2 feet, and the mind of a human is given back to him. If you remember chapter 4, the mind of an animal is given to Nebuchadnezzar, and then he returns to his place as king. So this first beast, very, very symbolic, but very representative of King Nebuchadnezzar, the king that we read about throughout the whole first part of the book of Daniel. And so now if we know that the first king is Nebuchadnezzar, this kind of unlocks all of the rest of them. Because if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream in Daniel chapter 2, in which there was a statue, and it was made up of 4 different kinds of materials, and the head was gold, and the interpreter said, God said that that was Nebuchadnezzar, but there would be 3 more kingdoms to come after him. Guess how many more beasts there are? 3. Maybe they're going to follow that exact same pattern, and of course they will. Let's get to the next beast, Daniel 7:5. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. So after the Babylonian Empire comes the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, known for its great size and its fierceness in battle. Pretty symbolic reference to a bear right there. Also, we have this crazy thing where we're told that the bear is raised up on one of its sides. And now I just realized that we're streaming, and so the camera just watched me do this like interpretation here. So that's going to be on the internet forever, so that's great. So the bear is raised up on one of its sides, and we go, what does that mean? Unless we start to think about the Medo-Persian Empire, which of course is made up of 2 empires pushed together, the Medes and the Persians. And the one empire is vastly larger and stronger than the other. So the Persians are bigger and stronger than the Medes. So you have a bear pieced together of 2 sides, and one side is much bigger than the other, which means that one side kind of looks like it's lifted up on one side. So we have this bear, representative of the Medo-Persian Empire, and we're told that it has 3 ribs sticking out of its teeth. It just so happens that the Medes and the Persians would have 3 great historic victories as an empire. That they would overtake Babylon in 539, they would overtake Lydia in 546, and they would overtake Egypt in 525. 3 ribs out of the mouth of this giant empire, 3 big territories that it has conquered. Okay, so we got Babylon, the first, we have the Medes and the Persians in the second, and now we're going to get to the third beast in 7 verse 6. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads and was given authority to rule. Think back to Daniel 2. So we have Babylon, we have the Medes and the Persians, and after the Medes and the Persians come the Greek Empire. Now, the leopard, historically, in this area of the world, was representative of 2 things: speed and bloodlust. And if we start talking about the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, those 2 things match pretty well. And not only was the leopard itself fast, we are told that this leopard has 4 wings, so it is really fast. Well, Alexander the Great would begin his conquest with an invasion of Asia Minor in 334, and within 10 years, he would go on to control the entire Medo-Persian territory and everything else all the way to the borders of India, and legend has it that within 10 years, Alexander wept because there was no more great territory to conquer. Speed and bloodlust. Antipater would go on to gain control of Greece and Macedonia after his death. Lysimachus would rule Thrace. Seleucus would govern Syria, and Ptolemy would control Egypt and Palestine. So you have Alexander the Great leading this great conquest, and he dies, and his empire is divided up under how many leaders? 4. Thus, the leopard has 4 heads. 4 heads, representative of the Greek Empire. And now we get to the 4th beast, and things get a little more interesting. Verses 7 and 8. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast. It was terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and it trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. So this 4th beast is, quote, different from the rest. And if you notice, it doesn't have any animal description. The first 3 all have this thing that we can realize and recognize in our mind. The 4th one is different. The 4th one doesn't have an animal description. We're just told it's bigger, and it has iron teeth, and it just kind of rolls over whatever it wants to, maybe making it a little scarier. This is most likely representative of the Roman Empire, marked in history for its incredible power, longevity, and also cruelty. This beast, we're told, has 10 horns, and horns are representative of rulers, like heads. In fact, if you looked up a lot of ancient crowns for rulers, they had some sort of animal horn attached to it. Think like the Viking cap. Horns were symbolic reference to power. And so this particular beast has 10 horns. It has 10 different kings or leaders. And this little horn rises up and takes out some of the other 3. But this horn is interesting because we're told it has the eyes of a human and it has a loud mouth. And so the eyes here are kind of representative of this idea of course, seeing, but also kind of cunning knowledge. So this horn is going to be crafty. It's going to be intelligent. And it's going to be boastful. It's going to be saying a lot of things. And it's going to be pretty powerful. So the rest of the beasts are pretty easy to interpret. And for the most part, this one is too. But with this little horn, we have some intrigue. Daniel seems to be preoccupied with this horn too. And so in 19 through 22, he'll ask for interpretation about this little mouthy horn. And in verse 23, we will get a little clue here. He gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are the 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the other ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High, and he will oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hand for time, times, and half a time. Now, this is where a lot of things get kind of crazy in the book of Daniel, because some people use time, times, and half a time to try to date the second coming of Jesus. It's really not the point here. In fact, the terms are so vague but repeated several times, almost as if to imply that God knows what this means, but you don't. He has the time. He knows what it is. It's time, times, and half a time. It's specific to him, but it's not something that you're going to know. And so this is going to happen. This little horn is going to be there. And so what does this little horn represent? There are two most logical explanations. The first is that this is a prophecy about the end times, and that this little horn represents Satan. Satan will come up and he will turn into what Revelation will describe as the Antichrist, right? So that's one explanation. The most probable and the most informative interpretation there is that this represents someone named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And we will talk about him next week because he plays a large role in chapter 8. So there are two big explanations for the little horn. But for now, who the little horn is doesn't really matter. You go, why does it not matter? Okay, back to verse 9. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words that the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but they were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming within the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Last bit of interpretation here as we wrap things up. God appears as one called the Ancient of Days, one who is aged, one who is wise, one who is able to look upon all of this chaos and turmoil and king-making and beast-moving with perspective. His clothing and his hair are white, which indicates purity. He sits on a throne of fire, meaning he has power and authority to issue judgment. And as big as some of these empires seem, we are told that the Ancient of Days is attended by 10,000 by 10,000 people. And if you go, okay, well, that's kind of big, but if we're talking the Roman Empire, 10,000 is the largest number that the Hebrew language had a word for. And this is Google times Google, or this is infinity times infinity, right? This is the biggest number they had a word for. And so the Ancient of Days sits on the throne, and a multitude bigger than anybody else is at his disposal. He is giving authority. We're told that he has this position of a judge, that the court gathers around him, and that this book is opened before him. This is the book of life. In essence, what we're being told here is all of these beasts are coming and going, and they're devouring, and they're doing all of these things. And the whole time, the Ancient of Days is on the throne, and he has the book in front of him, and he sees what's happening. And as the judge, he will judge the actions of these empires. As he sits on the throne, out of the clouds comes one looking like a son of man. Now, what we're asked to do here is compare that to these descriptions of these other rulers, that they would be beasts, they would be mashups of these kind of scary ideas. And now we're told that the king is on the throne, and the one who comes out of the clouds who will rule them all looks like you and I, looks like a son of man. You don't have to be afraid of him. You don't have to be scared of him. He doesn't have wings or ribs sticking out of his mouth. He doesn't have iron teeth. He is one like us. He is a son of man. And he will be given authority. He will be given all the glory, and all the earth will worship him. And his kingdom, his empire, we are told, will never be destroyed. Let's wrap it up. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream in which God revealed that, sure, Nebuchadnezzar is powerful and mighty, but that his reign will come to an end. And after him, there will be several more empires that will come, and they too will all end. Each of them with a king that thinks that he has power and control. But the message of that dream, the message to Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, is that God is in control. Empires rise and empires fall, kings come and kings go, but there is one who will reign forever, and his reign is coming. And now here in Daniel chapter 7, God sends Daniel a dream that tells him and his people the same thing, right? There are all these crazy things happening in the world around you. The chaotic sea is churning. The four winds are doing things that we can't see. And out of that, these big, huge empires and these powerful kings will rise. But there's a kingdom that's coming. And this kingdom will last forever. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop that king or his kingdom. Now put yourselves in the minds of Daniel and his people. They're living in a world of chaos. They're besieged by Babylon. They're overtaken. Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 1 is trying to erase their cultural identity. Babylon is then overtaken by the Medes and the Persians, and God's people are just at the whim, or at the service of every whim of whichever king comes into power. And the whole time they're reading the stories of Genesis and Exodus and Deuteronomy, and they're going, I thought we were God's people. I thought God loved us. I thought God was with us. And then look at the world. What is happening to us? What is happening with the world? Where is God? And God sends Daniel a dream that says that even though the world looks crazy, even though it looks tough, even though all this stuff is going on, God is still on the throne. The Ancient of Days is seeing this with perspective. The book is open, and the Son of Man is coming. And much like ordering a package in the early 2000s, you know it's going to get here, you just have no idea when. And in the meantime, we just have to wait for it. We wait for that kingdom to come. But Daniel chapter 7 teaches us that while we're waiting, we should be able to look at the situation with some of that perspective. And rest assured, the Ancient of Days is still on the throne, and the Son of Man is coming. Let's worship one more time, sing one more song. If I can pray for you this morning, I'd be happy to do that if you just want to come find me at the front. And again, Robert will lead us in one more, and then we'll have a prayer. So.